Hey, Gats and Gittens, it's your professor of geekology, Chuck Dixon, here to answer questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And if you have a question for me, suggestion, or whatever, send it on over to brunobookstore@gmail.com, the most reliable way to reach me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. First question, Johnny McCloskey. You do a fantastic job of describing the art of storytelling. Well, thank you. Are there any comics that you'd suggest reading, either that you or someone else has written, that tells a great story? Do you have any artists that you'd recommend as great storytellers? Well, it's a big question with a lot of answers. There's so many great examples of storytelling in the world of comics, and literally all over the world. But I'm going to concentrate on one. This is kind of one-stop shopping for everything you're looking for in great comic storytelling. EC Comics was famous, or rather infamous, for horror comics. But for my money, the best thing they ever produced were their two war titles, Frontline Combat and Two-Fisted Tales. These were produced during the time of the Korean War, and they're probably the most brutally frank war comics ever produced in this country. Both books were created and driven and mostly written by Harvey Kurtzman, who at the same time was creating Mad Magazine, an entirely different prospect from these two books. Because Frontline Combat and Two-Fisted Tales it's pretty grim material, but it's so wonderfully presented. Kurtzman would write the scripts and do layouts for his artists. And there's a heavy emphasis, unlike most American comic books at the time, there was a heavy emphasis on cinematic storytelling. This is bravura comics storytelling. This is pure comics. Combination of words and pictures, just enough words to allow the artist to carry the story visually. And as you can see, often no words. And Kurtzman's amazing use of sound effects, amazingly effective use of sound effects. And it's just great stuff. And Kurtzman often would draw stories himself and provide covers. But as far as, like I said, it's one-stop shopping for storytelling, because not only is the craft here, and the stories are evocative, they're easy to follow, and the perfect balance of words and pictures, which I always emphasize is what pure comics are all about. There's also a lot of heart in these stories. Each 8-page and sometimes 7-page story is a mini epic on its own. It introduces its own ensemble cast, sets up the situation, the historic situation, be it conflicts in the Korean War, Civil War, ancient Rome, all over the map. It's very much a historical adventure books. Both of these books are. But they set all of that up, and they always tell a marvelous story, often with a twist ending, because that was EC's style, but sometimes not. Sometimes a grim downer ending, or an ending that evokes some sort of emotional catharsis. There's a number of these stories which are deeply effective because they have so much heart. There's a story called Belly Robber, illustrated by Jack Davis, that if you don't tear up a little by the end of the story, you simply have no heart. And that's rare in comics, for them to explore the range of emotional depth that Harvey Kurtzman and his artists managed to plumb here. The only other examples I can think of are also in the war genre. Early 70s DC war comics, particularly those by Joe Kubert and Russ Heath, written by Robert Kanigher, sometimes written by Russ Heath, also touch on all of the things I talked about here. The craft of storytelling, the level of characterization, the depth of emotions, all the rest of it. But check them out. They're reprinted. They're not hard to find in reprint form on eBay and Amazon. And anything by Kurtzman is worth looking at. But in particular, for me, this is him at the peak of his powers. Frank Jackson, when you were writing Guy Gardner comics, were you aware that the personality Steve Englehart gave Guy was meant to mock right-wing people? Yeah, I was. If you were, how did this impact how you characterize Guy? For example, did you try to give Guy a more positive narrative? I suppose Guy is similar to Judge Dredd Rorschach in that he became more popular than their creators intended him to. Yeah, I mean, Guy was kind of created as a Green Lantern wannabe. He was like a second choice, second string Green Lantern. Maybe a guy who should not have been given the lantern. And this is his original characterization. As a guy who's a little bit petty, a little bit vindictive. Steve Englehart, I believe you correctly report, decided to make him a conservative because I guess Steve Englehart sees all conservatives as petty and vindictive. He probably doesn't actually know any conservatives. He goes along with the media's general depiction of conservatives as, evil, racist, misogynistic, xenophobic bastards, which isn't my experience with conservatism. I'm a lifelong conservative. How lifelong? When I was 10 years old, I put out yard signs for Barry Goldwater and was very crestfallen when he did not win the presidency. Still am. Still upset that Barry Goldwater didn't win. So, yeah, I didn't like this portrayal. My image of conservatives is someone who prizes individual freedom, wants smaller government, lower taxes, a strong military, wants the government to do its job and stay out of our lives. I'm not quite a libertarian, but yeah, I confess to being a far-right conservative. As you say, conservatives in the comic book audience, and there used to be a lot of them, responded to this depiction of Guy Gardner by liking him. They saw Guy Gardner as brash, a guy who speaks his mind, a guy who, brooks no BS. So they responded and they liked him. So he became a very popular character. And when I wrote him, I gave him a bit of a background. I was the first one to write about basically Guy Gardner year one, his childhood, a very troubled childhood and things like that, which gave the background for a lot of Guy Gardner's attitude toward people. He was a bit brash. He was a bit impatient. He was a bit outspoken. But, that those qualities are visible in people all over the political spectrum. They're not, exclusive to people on the right. But yeah, I objected to the portrayal because the, people that wrote him as a, mouth-breathing Neanderthal moron because of his political views, either didn't care to or simply didn't have a grasp on what makes a conservative or what makes a well-rounded three-dimensional character. And I tried to correct that when I wrote Guy Gardner. Another character who got away from his creators and became popular when he wasn't supposed to be was Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker was presented as a bigot, a conservative guy, and a guy who didn't, xenophobic. A lot of the humor grew out of awkward situations that he was put in, where he was, outside of his comfort zone with people of another race and all the rest of it, which I thought was an inaccurate portrayal. This guy grew up in, I believe Archie's from Brooklyn. I grew up in a city and nobody acted awkward around each other. It was all different kinds of people, but they would always treat Archie as if, he somehow landed from another planet in Brooklyn and had never, been around minorities before. Certainly Archie in his job had worked with minorities. New York City and Brooklyn, it's a polyglot community of all kinds of people. I never understood how Archie could be xenophobic and live there. I mean, why wouldn't he move to, Vermont or something where he wouldn't have to deal with minorities? But anyway, he was presented as the bad guy on the show. Well, the audience didn't see it that way. Despite his flaws as a character, the audience responded to the fact that he was outspoken. He spoke his mind, and he said things that nobody else on TV would say. And his son-in-law, Mike, who played by Rob Reiner, was supposed to be, I guess, the hero of the show, but came off in the end as Archie's foil. Archie always got the best of him. I think the writers thought they were writing these hateful screeds coming out of Archie, these intolerant, ripostes he would have to Mike's arguments. But the audience thought they were funny. The audience knew people like Archie, and a lot of the audience were people like Archie. And they were laughing at, we were in changing times, post-civil rights movement, all the rest of it. And Archie was kind of representative of a character from the past. I mean, Archie really wasn't contemporary to the time in which he was being presented. Archie was a character out of the 1930s or 1940s, but transplanted to the 1970s New York. But audiences responded. They liked him. He became the hero of the show and a beloved character. Went on to be, have his own series and all the rest of it, his own spin-off series. And CBS, who was producing it at the time, they saw a cash cow here. So as left-leaning as they were, and as much as their intentions were to mock blue-collar Americans who didn't hold views that they agreed with, they were certainly willing to make money off of Archie. And I remember in the 1972 presidential election, they licensed the line of Archie Bunker for President products. And you could go to JCPenney's and buy Archie Bunker for President bumper stickers and posters and buttons and everything else. So while they probably were dismayed at the fact that the public embraced Archie in a way that they did not anticipate, they certainly didn't mind raking in some cash off the licensing end. So, and that tells you everything you need to know about the media, about the entertainment media. It all comes down to that dollar. If they'll go against their stated political beliefs in order to pick a few, coins up off the street. Now, a right-wing character they got right, in my opinion anyway, is Alec Baldwin's character on the show 30 Rock. He's supposed to be a network executive connected to the parent company that owns NBC. And he's very much a Reagan conservative, rock-ribbed Reagan conservative. And he says things that are outrageous. And like Archie Bunker, he says things that make the other cast members' jaws drop. And his attitude toward, free trade and politics and all the rest of it. He often comes out with these just, shocking things to say. But there is either a conservative in the writer room on this show, or they knew a conservative that they liked. Because Alec Baldwin's character, although he's kind of the bad guy on the show, is still likable and we care about him. But most importantly, the things that he says are funny to conservatives. And I guess they're funny to liberals as well because they're appalled by what he's saying. Conservatives are laughing because he's basically dropping a truth bomb on these liberals. Or he's presenting such an outrageous example of a conservative, but a well-informed, knowledgeable satire of a conservative that, everybody can find it amusing. Which, isn't that the point of entertainment? To reach as many people as possible, not piss off half your audience, like seems to be the trend today. So Alec Baldwin, who's certainly not a conservative at all, did a great job playing this character, and more importantly, the writers did a great job writing him. Because, I would watch the show, I enjoyed it, and I never saw a scene where I thought, well, they got this wrong, or this wasn't fair to present him in such a way. Or, it's possible. You can write, Dear Hollywood, you can write a well-rounded conservative character who isn't, hateful and despicable and seems like a normal human being. Because in the end, we're all Americans. So Marcine Plesh. Marcine, you sent me a very long email with a lot of questions and a lot of very kind remarks, and I really appreciate it. And I'm going to kind of break it up over the next few episodes. So we will be seeing more Marcine Plesh contributions to this channel. But Marcine says, I am a Polish immigrant to the UK. My great loves in life are my wife, my work, and arts. Not bad. Particularly reading, loads of both books and comics and movies. Okay, the one question I picked out for this episode is, do you like the 80s comic series, The Nam? Those not familiar with The Nam, it started in a magazine that Larry Hama edited called Savage Tales. It started as a series of stories by Doug Murray and art by Michael Golden, and the stories were called The First of the 10th, referring to the unit that the core characters were in. And this evolved into a monthly series called The Nam, written by Doug Murray. And at the beginning of the series, most of the issues were drawn by Michael Golden. And Murray was a Vietnam veteran himself, and so he wrote from a position of authority. And the stories are uniformly excellent. I mean, the artwork by Golden is astounding. The level of authenticity. We have Larry Hama. I believe Larry Hama edited the initial few issues of this. Larry himself, also being a Vietnam vet, insisted on authenticity. So this is probably the most accurate war comic you're ever likely to read. And it's wonderful, and it ran for 85 issues. And but did I like it? Well, I liked it enough I wrote for it. I wrote about, I think, 15 issues of The Nam. I was the regular writer for over a year. And the story of how I got into writing The Nam is kind of, I guess it's interesting. So I'm going to tell it. For whatever reason, Don Daly was the editor on The Nam, and he became disenchanted with Doug Murray's writing. I don't know, for whatever reason. Doug's a terrific writer and a great guy. But for whatever reason, he wasn't writing the kind of stories that Don wanted. And Don asked me if I would take on the writing chores on The Nam. And I immediately said no, because I didn't serve in Vietnam. I was never in uniform. I was in, I came up number 3 in the last draft lottery just before they called off the draft. So I would have gone. I went for my physical and all the rest of it, but I did not serve. And I didn't come home and cry about it like Bruce Springsteen did. But I said no. And Doug said, why not? I gave him the reasons I just gave you. I didn't serve. He says, well, there's not a lot of comic book writers who are Vietnam veterans that I care to have on this book. I can't even think of one other than Doug, and I don't want Doug anymore for whatever reason. And I said, well, I don't want to do it. And he says, look, do me a favor, at least talk to Larry. Talk to Larry Hama and tell him this problem you're having. I said, okay, all right. So I called Larry on the phone. I said, Larry, Don wants me to write this book. I don't feel right about it. And Larry said, because Larry was a Vietnam vet. And Larry said, look, you'll do the homework and you'll show the respect to the troops. He says, I know you'll do a good job. And he said, so take it on. He says, you know what you're doing. You can bring that air of authenticity. And he says, and if you need help, just talk to Vietnam vets. And Larry offered to introduce me to some guys he knew. Well, Wayne Van Zant was the regular artist on the book at the time. And he was a Vietnam vet as well, and he knew lots of other Vietnam vets. So between Larry and Wayne, I got to talk to dozens of vets, and that was the best part of working on this book, because as much as I read about it and gathered visual reference and all the rest of it, because I like being able to give my artists a visual reference for what I'm writing. The best part about it was talking to those vets. Some amazing conversations. They told me some incredible stories that I could not include in the book because it was comics code. But whenever I had a question about authenticity, could this have happened? Could that have happened? Either Wayne or Larry would hook me up with a guy on the phone who was perfectly willing to talk to me and appreciative that I was trying to do the right thing by presenting the Vietnam conflict accurately. both from the attitudes of the soldiers, to the weaponry, to the tactics, and all the rest of it. So I dug doing it. As I said, I got to work with Wayne, and I got to work with Russ Heath on an issue I really liked, about a mystery sniper. And that was really cool. I mean, getting to do a war story with Russ Heath was awesome. And ultimately, I wrote what I thought was the best story I've ever written, in my own personal opinion, my personal best, the Nam number 66, The Creep. And it's another sniper story. And the artwork by Kevin Kobasic, cover by Michael Golden. And it was a story I wrote in one sitting. I just sat down. It just came out of me, like God moved into my hands, and to tell this story. But yeah, I liked the Nam. I liked writing for the Nam. I kind of miss writing for the Nam because I did so much research that I could get my head. I did something set in Vietnam recently, and my head just went right back to all that stuff. And the lingo. I mean, I became very conversant with all of the acronyms and slang of the period, and I really dug it. Joe from Philly, you hungry? Squeak. I'm from Philly myself. I have always been curious about the nuts and bolts of comic book production and what went into pushing out books month after month to the newsstands. Do you know anything about the advertisements and their placement? Was there a salesman who worked at the offices of either DC, Marvel, or Charlton who was on the phone placing ads for Sea Monkeys and Grit? Or was that handled at the printer? I always imagined an older guy in a rumpled brown suit calling and asking companies if they wanted to run their Seed or Kung Fu ads again in next month's Hulk. By the way, I read Shrinkage and liked it a lot. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Very kind words. Yeah, the old ads in the comic books, which seem to run forever and ever and ever, which leads me to assume they must have been successful, because why would they pay to run the ads if nobody was sending in the little coupons, sending in their, $1.98 or whatever to get a cardboard box that had printing on it to make it look like a tank, or a bunch of really crappy little toy soldiers. It's yeah, I mean, there was obviously somebody at the comic book company that I never met that was on another floor that was selling the ad space into the comic books. So this one in particular, the monkey you can hold in the palm of your hand, I think my parents were kept awake at night having nightmares that my oldest sister might order this. She might clip the coupon out of one of my comics and order herself a monkey. They had another ad where a monkey that could fit inside a teacup, because my oldest sister was an animal nut. Anyway, I'm sure parents, laid awake at night having nightmares over a lot of these ads. Kids saving up their allowance to send in for some, worthless piece of crap. But sea monkeys, by the way, are brine shrimp. They're just kind of freeze-dried brine shrimp that come to life when you put them in water. So anyway, yeah, I mean, there was a guy somewhere in the building, on the phone. I always pictured the same kind of guy in the rumpled suit sitting on the phone, taking 2 martini lunch with clients. What a cushy job this guy must have had, because a lot of these ads sold themselves. I mean, I'm sure you didn't have to call Charles Atlas every month, or some of those crappy greeting card companies. I'm sure they didn't have to call every month. Albert Dorn at the famous artist school. But of course, all of this changed over time as, those kind of huckster ads vanished, and more quote-unquote reputable companies like candy companies and toy companies, Hasbro and Mars Bars and Mattel began to advertise in the books, to reach their target audience of kids. And eventually, in the 80s, even to today, a lot of the ads are for computer games, which I thought was unusual because the comic book publishers were always bemoaning the fact that video games were taking away their audience, and yet they were perfectly willing to take the bucks to advertise those very same games in the pages of their magazines. And would annoy me because a lot of times the artwork on the ads for the computer or video games were far better than the artwork in the comic, and you could see why the kids departed. And thanks for the mention of Shrinkage. It's a novel set in Philadelphia. And this isn't the commercial, by the way. There's more questions after this. I'm just taking a chance to plug one of my own books. It's a novel, a crime novel, standalone, about a shoplifter in 1970s Philadelphia who gets in way over his head with all the wrong people. You can find it on Amazon. Ron Young. Larry Hama has an action figure. Shouldn't you? Does he still return your calls? If you ever acquire a Larry Hama action figure for your collection, how will you display him? I would display him prominently, probably with lots of other action figures dead at his feet. And this is the Larry Hama action figure, and I think it's awesome. I think it's cool. Why don't I have an action figure? Because I'm not as awesome as Larry Hama. I readily admit it. My file card on the back of my blister pack would not be anywhere near as interesting as Larry Hama's. And he's deserving of an action figure since he's sold so many to so many kids. It's about time he's had his own. And does he return my calls? I haven't talked to Larry Hama in a very long time, but I assume he would. I assume Larry would talk to me. We differ on a lot of things, but I think he still regards me as a friend. I certainly regard him as a friend and mentor. If you've watched any of these videos, you know that I place Larry and Archie Goodwin both on equally high pedestals as guys who helped shape my career and help me out, as well as being tremendous talents in the comic book medium. And in Larry's case, beyond the comic book medium. The man is a polymath of talent. And that's all I'll say for right now, because I'll probably talk about Larry Hama again in the future. William Ezel, or Ezel. As a comic creator, where do you draw the line at separating the art from the artist? I always separate the art from the artist. If it's comics, if it's music, if it's whatever. I mean, I don't, I want my work to speak for itself. I want my work to speak on its own merit. I don't, and I do the same for others. Now, we all see an interview with an actor or a writer or a musician, and we go, oh my God, this guy's either an idiot or just an effete jerk, or I don't agree with him on anything, or he's obnoxious, or whatever. And I can see that. I mean, we all do, and you go, oh, I'm so disappointed. But that never stops me from enjoying their work. There's lots of people. I mean, I wouldn't listen to any music. If it were about liking the person performing it, I probably, I wouldn't want to spend any time with most of the musicians I listen to. I just don't see where people will go, well, I don't like what that guy said or what she said, and I'm going to boycott them forever. Because I give everybody a break. If I enjoy the work, I enjoy the work, and I assume on some level I have something in common with that person. I have some sort of rapport. Example I'll give you here is David Mamet. I love David Mamet's work, screenwriter and playwright. He's not for everybody, but I really like his stuff. And I read interviews with him and heard interviews with him on NPR, and he was a big New York liberal, a guy I would never agree with about virtually anything. But in consulting with his rabbi, in long conversations with his rabbi, Mamet came to the realizations that perhaps his guise as a New York liberal was a sham, that he wasn't faking it. He thought he really was a New York liberal, but he realized he didn't live like a New York liberal. He lived life like a conservative. He's an observant Jew. He was, he had his own self-interests in continuing his career, making money, taking care of his family. His talent allowed him to live very comfortably. He's hardworking, industrious, and he realized that more and more he didn't agree with the very viewpoints that were coming out of his mouth. And the thing is that while he probably enjoyed talking to his rabbi and got a lot out of it, I could have explained the same thing to him in 5 minutes just as a consumer of his work. When you read or see his plays or his movies, there's not a liberal bone in them. There really isn't. The man was a conservative before he realized he was a conservative. And there's an example of you can't judge him by his work. And, he was lauded, especially on Broadway, for his, brilliant stage dramas. And of course today, he probably couldn't get a stage drama put on to save his life because he's come out as no longer a liberal. And, there you go. There's one side of the equation here which will not tolerate, will not brook disagreement, and therefore cannot separate the art from the artist. Another example I'll use, because I don't want to name artists, writers, or whatever who are unpleasant, who are alive, but I will talk about Patricia Highsmith. Patricia Highsmith wrote primarily crime novels. Well, I think that's all she wrote, was crime novels and crime short stories. She's most famous for the Hitchcock film Strangers on a Train, which was based on one of her stories, and also the creation of Tom Ripley, who's featured in a series of novels. He's a sociopathic murderer who, gives trouble to everyone he meets all over Europe. He sort of travels through high society in Europe, causing problems. And Highsmith herself, by every report, was a raging sociopath herself. She abused anyone close to her. She was predatory and mean and vindictive, and left a lot of people, brokenhearted, destitute, or emotionally bereft after she had cruised through their life. Just not the nicest person in the world. And you got to think that informed her work. It's hard to imagine someone creating the character of Tom Ripley and writing him so authentically, or creating the character Bruno, the psychopath from Strangers on a Train, so effectively. And if you read her crime novels, they're really unlike any others. They're about the everyday gone wrong. They're about normal people driven to extraordinary circumstances. They're about people, characters who are divorced from the rest of the morality that the rest of us live in. They live through the social contract that we all expect from one another, and they take advantage of the fact that no one realizes that they are a wolf among sheep. And that's pretty much how Patricia Highsmith lived her life. And so in that case, it's hard to separate the art from the artist. But there's a lot of writers out there that if you knew their personal views, you would probably find them repugnant, especially characters from the past. And in cancel culture, we see this over and over again. We try to, they're canceling Dr. Seuss, they're canceling Mark Twain, they're canceling Willa Cather, they're canceling Laura Ingalls, writers who, are revered in American literature because they don't hold views conducive to the woke literati that exists today. Well, of course they don't, because they're from the past. People from the past don't share the same views that we have. They didn't have opinions on things that we have opinions on, or they had opinions that were different from the conventional opinions. But isn't that what makes their work interesting? I mean, if you found out that one of your favorite novels was written by a racist, would you not like that novel anymore? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe, as hard as this is to take, maybe racism informed his work. Maybe racism made that work seem authentic. I mean, think about it. I know that's flies in the face of conventional morality or conventional wisdom today, but it's true. You have to open your mind to this stuff, and you have to separate the art from the artist, or you can't enjoy art anymore. So, I mean, Pablo Picasso was a prick. There's no changing that. Adolf Hitler was a war hero. There's no changing that. Everybody's not as simple as they seem. Everybody's more multidimensional. And everybody who works in creative stuff, if they're doing it right, the stuff is informed from their heart or lack thereof. So yeah, I do separate the art from the artist. And I think everybody should, in order to have a rich experience with literature, with cinema, with music, with fine arts, whatever it is you dig. Eric Morin, If the Conan property went to a publisher you could work for, or would allow me to work for them, would you ever return to write Conan's adventures again? Your Savage Sword of Conan is my favorite run of Conan stories. Number 145, Feast of the Stag, being one of my favorite Conan stories ever. Damn you for getting my hopes up for Conan getting an awesome dog companion. Of course, the only companion Conan needs is a sharp blade, and occasionally a woman. Yeah, I'd write Conan again, but I wrote a lot of Conan. I was the regular writer on the book for like 5 years. Savage Sword, 50-page stories every month. I did quite a bit of work for Conan the Savage, and I wrote some stories for Marvel Italia, which never showed up in English. So I've written a lot of Conan, and I probably said everything I have to say. Although I'd love to come back and write, some violent sword swinging action. Why not? But it's not an itch that I felt that I haven't already scratched a whole lot. So, and as far as the dog, that was a nod to Gary Quapis. Gary Quapis owned a pair of Great Danes, these amazing dogs. At the same time, we were working on Savage Sword, and he wanted me to work one of his dogs into the story, which I did, and he had a blast drawing it. Drawing that dog. Well, Gary draws everything well, but boy, he draws the best dogs ever in comics. A lot of artists can't draw animals, or can't draw them well or convincingly, but Gary does not have that problem. He knows animal anatomy and everything else. And Feast of the Stag, that was kind of a neat story. I liked writing all of them. What can I say? Michael Hutchison, hey Hutch. Regarding the difference between romance and sexuality, I'm reminded of Birds of Prey from you right around the time Dick and Barbara had started dating. You had put a lot of tension into their relationship, added a lot of, is this going to pay off or go anywhere type complications. Shortly after Gail Simone took over, she just showed Dick and Barbara in bed together. Is this similar to the Kill Jack Drake situation where plot complications are the basis of the story and you shouldn't just eliminate the obstacles? Yeah, the Kill Jack Drake thing, for those of you who don't know, Jack Drake was Tim Drake's father, the Robin, Tim Drake Robin, third Robin. And at every Bat Summit, the editors and other writers would ask me, well, when are you going to kill Jack Drake? Because I was the Robin writer. I was writing all of Robin. I was guiding his career. I said, I never want to kill Jack Drake. And they said, well, he causes so many complications in the story. I said, well, that's the point of having Jack Drake around. That's why Aunt May is still around. That's why Lois Lane is still around. You need those complications. Having a secret identity is part of being a masked vigilante. And the complications that arise from it often make for great stories. And it's always a background tension. And Tim Drake, unlike all the other Batman characters, had a real life outside of being Robin. I mean, he was going to high school, and he had friends, and he had a dad at home, and a snoopy housekeeper. And so he had to guard his identity as Robin from his dad. And I liked his dad. I liked the dad character. And the complications that grew out of that. Because, I mean, he had to be home on a school night. But the Riddler's back in town, So he had to have reasons why. And, of course, his dad assumed he was a juvenile delinquent. And Tim had to pretend he was. All kinds of things. I mean, his dad at one point gets sick and tired of the lies and excuses. And Tim didn't like lying to his dad. But he saw it for the greater good, but it always bothered him. And so Jack Drake gets tired of his kid acting up and sends him off to a boarding school, which was, that was a complication that refreshed the book, gave it a new perspective and a new cast of characters and some new complications. Because, wow, how do you get out of a live-in boarding school at night to go fight crime? That's even tougher than sneaking away, when dad's asleep. So, and again, the romance complications are the same thing. You want to keep that boy meets girl, boy loses girl thing going. What they used to call in Hollywood the love rack. You have to have things that draw the characters together. Their mutual attraction to one another, mutual sexual attraction. But at the same time, you have to have things pulling them apart, and that's what creates an interesting romance story. if two people just meet and fall in love and get married, that's not a story. That's just life. That's not interesting. But if you've got Hatfield and McCoy's, or Romeo and Juliet kind of thing where they can't be together, or one of my favorites, The Postman Always Rings Twice, where the two characters are drawn together, but then torn apart because the thing they share other than this sexual attraction for one another is they share a murder, and so it unites and separates them all at the same time, and one of the greatest love wracks ever. And you see this in all kinds of romantic comedies are basically a love rack story played for laughs, and so I wanted to keep that going. And also, I wanted to keep the questionability of did they or didn't they up in the air. I kind of went the old movie route. I always did this with superhero characters. None of my characters were sexually active. I never portrayed them that way. But I always left it so that you could imagine maybe they were. If you wanted them to be sexually active in between the panels, I set stuff up so that could happen. In the old movies, they did it all the time. Two characters would go into a clinch, fade to black. Next scene, they're having breakfast together and they're wearing different clothes. So you could think, well, this is just the next day. They kissed and then he went home, or they stayed together, and then he stopped by for breakfast the next day. So you could tell yourself whatever you wanted. You could believe whatever you wanted. And, the Hollywood censors were happy with that system. It's like, if you got a dirty mind, keep it to yourself. We're not putting it on screen. And I was the same way. I mean, you could assume that that Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon were having sex, being sexually active, or not. I mean, I left it open. And I did that for all of my characters except Conan, who was obviously being sexually active as part of his thing, and Frank Castle. I thought Frank Castle, it's a more mature character. It's more, despite the fantastical elements of the Punisher, he's more real world. He's more grounded. So occasionally he would have a relationship. And I should tell you about Mike Barron's ideas on that, but maybe somebody will ask about it. I can talk about it in a future video. But anyway, I took the old movie approach. Just showing them together in bed sort of, to me, took the magic away from it and sort of removed the complications that I put in place before. But, you see that all the time. It's just sort of cut to the two characters waking up in bed the next morning. Or the obligatory slow motion overlapping sex scene that has grown tiresome over the decades. So anyway, we're heading into a Michael Hutchison twin spin. Yeah, Michael Hutchison had another great question, which was, what do you think of the 1981 movie High Risk, a film almost nobody today has heard of? High Risk was an action comedy that came out in 1981 and had a great cast. James Brolin, Anthony Quinn, James Coburn, Cleavon Little. And it's about four blue-collar workaday guys who either lost their jobs or they're underpaid and inflation's eating up. Remember, this is, they're coming out of the 70s. They're coming out of the Carter melees. And things are not going well for them. They live in L.A. It's expensive. And they decide to solve all their problems. They're going to go down to South America and kidnap a cocaine drug lord and hold him for ransom and get a whole big boodle of money, and that'll solve all their problems. And they go to Ernest Borgnine and buy some guns in a very funny sequence. This is an action comedy for the most part. And they head on down to South America. And they're not soldiers. They're not even vets. They really don't know what they're doing. And all they know about action, seeing action or combat, is what they've seen in movies. And a lot of that's played for laughs. There's a lot of cliche-busting scenes in this movie that I really liked. There's one where they have to knock out a guard at the drug lord's mansion and or villa. And James Brolin goes up and just, clocks the guy on the back of the head with the butt of a rifle, thinking that, in the movies, the guy just falls to the ground. Well, this guy doesn't fall to the ground. He starts screaming. He won't stop screaming. And they finally just have to beat the living hell out of him until he's unconscious. And of course, it ruins their plans and alerts everybody. I love stuff like that, where you take a cliche and turn it on its head. Had a great crowd-pleasing ending. Just a lot of fun. And I remember when I worked at a video store in the 80s, I told the video store owner, look, order me a bunch of copies of this. I can rent these every night that I'm here because nobody ever heard of the movie. And I would rent those. They were a big earner for us because it was a cheap movie to buy. And we, like I had promised, it rented every night, word of mouth. People would come in. We had to buy more copies. There's a very good reason this movie isn't well known. It was released the same weekend as Raiders of the Lost Ark. Why they chose to release it on that weekend, I have no idea, because it's a movie aimed at precisely the same audience that went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark, except, this movie did not have anywhere near the marketing budget. It ended up on cable, it ended up on video, but for the most part, it's forgotten. And I haven't rewatched it in years because, quite frankly, there's not really a decent copy of this around. Nobody has restored this to DVD. Nobody has put it back in widescreen aperture or anything like that. It really needs to be done because it's a movie that a lot of people would enjoy if they got a chance to see it. Maybe you caught it back in its many showings on HBO back in the day. But yeah, it's a movie I dig, and it's a movie I'd like to see again if they ever do any kind of a restoration to it. I've become a bit picky with high resolution these days. Okay. Have you checked out ArcTunes? 2 million views and growing. We got new properties. We've got dozens of episodes, every genre you can imagine, and it's free. Brand new digital platform in high res. You can read these comics on any device, anywhere in the world. The resolution's so high you can read it on your big screen TV in your family room, den, or living room. So do me a favor and check it out. I got a lot of stuff over there. A lot of the content is by me, and I'm really digging working on this new format. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and I'll see all of you down the road.